Well, welcome everybody to the J&J Show. I'm your host, Joe.
I'm the other Jay. I'm Josh. I don't think I'm a guest. I think
You're a guest? Well, you can be a guest on everyone, right?
that means you're the first Jay then.
I guess. I'm the older Jay. So there we go.
Age before beauty.
Welcome. I think today, for our topic, we kind of want to talk about personalized service in our industry. And I think that means something different for everyone. What are your thoughts, Josh?
No, it definitively does, and I think it's one of those, and it's a topic for another time, but overused phrases in our business. Which this one, it's kind of hard to say it's overused because it's legalistic as well, and we're not getting into it today. But fiduciary is thrown around everywhere now, like hotcakes. I don't know if that analogy still works. But it's also personalization. Everybody is personalized service, personalized solutions, personalized care. It's eventually you get to the point where something's used so frequently it no longer has a lot of meaning.
What is it, right? I think the big thing too is that phrase has a different meaning for everyone, honestly. Um, someone that's 25-year-old, personalized service might be a Zoom meeting, right?
And that's, I think it's prime example of not everyone needs, and I wouldn't say it's a bold statement, it's a frank statement. Not everyone needs quote unquote personalized. If you are, in your perfect example, how much personalization do you need if you're 25 years old, you're on your second job, you have your old 401k, you decide you want to go into an IRA because, say, for example, you heard of something that provides leverage on the market and that's what you want to do. Well, there's innumerable structures that do that. You decide you want the most aggressive one, and that's what you take. That's not necessarily personalized so much as just being aware of what's in the investment universe.
Well, I mean, I think at that age too, and where you are, it's just doing something, right? Rather than in getting started, because at that point, time is your best ally.
Absolutely.
But again, when you're sitting down with someone who's 70 years old, who's been around and through a lot of changes and a lot of different situations and seen the world change, I think dramatically, especially in the last 20 years, personalized service might be something different.
And I as an extension of personalization, because it's a from a business standpoint, it's a cost of goods sold. It's personalization is not typically free. There's some cost to that. And again, I use the example of someone early in their investment career, just their career as a whole. You may not need fee-based planning. You may not need advisory business. You may not need wealth management that has to do with charging an annual fee based on the amount of assets. It may be, even though it's not going down the fiduciary track per se, like an advisory relationship, you may only need a brokerage account that you pay a few dollars a year for to have a real aggressive investment strategy. And despite what the mainstream advertising may say, that may actually be the most reasonable and justifiable thing to do. Yeah. Of you have this one position, we keep it extremely inexpensive. It's not personalized in the sense that advertising is going to tell you it is, but it is a decision made solely because of the situation you're in life. Yeah. It's less expensive for you. It is tailored to what your goal is. But if you were to compare that, as you were alluding to earlier, to somebody who's perhaps 70 years old that has 50 or so securities, maybe they have annuities, they're using some option strategies, ETFs, mutual funds. Okay, by comparison, no, your strategy does not look personalized. But did you actually need that?
But also, I mean, the other layers, right? I think generationally, if you're a 25-year-old versus a 50 or a 60 or 70-year-old, your definition is going to be a little different, right? I think, someone that was around or that's way older than the world of Zoom, their expectation is that yeah, you're going to meet with them face to face. That's personalized. That you're going to customize everything for them, right? Zoom would not be considered personalization, right?
And I think you're hitting on something that I missed, which also goes to how you and I interact and also with clients, is when you're talking about personalization, you're talking about the care and communication they get. I've only been talking about investments. Yes. for personalization. So they're two completely different things.
Two personalities.
It does. Right? Yeah.
I'm always about, getting to know the individual, what's important to them, making that connection. And again, I think even for myself, it's hard to do that over a Zoom or over the phone, right? Because something gets lost in translation. And I think that, as a firm, that's why we're big on these
Yeah.
face-to-face meetings, because that's how you, I think, can really build relationships. And of course, we get clients that don't want to do that, and that's perfectly fine. But again, the preference is always is face-to-face because, it's the nuances. And sometimes, when you lose those, something gets lost in translation. And I think having that and just the eye contact and the body language, it helps us better figure out, what the client's looking for, what they need, what they're resistant to, and that way we can help build a better solution or strategy for them.
No, definitely agreed. And it's not to say, the preference for in person is more based around the clientele that we work
Mhm.
with. For example, and I don't know this to be true, but it'd be my assumption, say we were practice based out of, Silicon Valley and high tech related,
Mhm.
we may never have an in person meeting
No.
ever. And that doesn't mean it's any more or less personalized. I think part of the subset to the personalization that you at least somewhat hinted on is perhaps the flexibility side of it of, hey, we're flexible to whatever your preference is. Because we have clients that, through becoming more comfortable with us, first it was in person,
Yeah.
and now they'll probably never do an in person again. But they might be in their 60s and 70s, but it'll enables them to have more flexibility. We heard them, we made that pivot. So to use the phrase personalized, and I think it's that's why we say it means so many different things, which can be both good and bad. But I think it's become a major pitch point that everyone likes to use, everyone likes to say, that's just frankly been oversold at this point.
And I think for us, I mean, that's I think as a firm, um, in how we work with our clients, that's probably the most important thing is we want to meet the client where they want to be, right? So whether it's face to face, whether it's over Zoom, whether it's phone calls, it's whatever the client's preference is. I think that's really what personalization is, right? It's just meeting the client's expectation for what that is, and then that trickles down into everything else, right? you know, how we do reviews, how we do build their portfolios. And I think and correct me if you think this is wrong. There's really, in the way we do business, every portfolio is personalized to an extent. We don't really do cookie cutter here. It all comes down to what the individual needs for that individual client is, and it's going to be different from client X and client Y or client Z, and we're always going to do that because I don't think there is any one approach to help a client reach their goal.
Not for us. But I think it's also fair to say, and in your prior life, you'd know this as well as anyone, some firms don't work that way.
No.
Some firms are going to be, and it's their business decision and it's their right to do it. It's not how we work, yes, but it's not to say it's wrong. They may be Zoom only.
Yeah.
They may be that I only take on 2 clients a year, or I only work with X amount of people and this is common practice in our business, is people often fire the bottom percentage of their book.
Yeah.
Whether it's based upon assets, whether it's based upon the workload, it is bearing in mind, and perhaps it's not a nice thing to say, and it's not a position that we're in or something we've done, but it is commonplace, and I've seen it firsthand, for example, with some of the wires of, okay, every year I'm going to purge X amount of my book. And sometimes that's done actively. Sometimes it's like quiet quitting where you just don't hear from them.
Yeah.
And you won't hear from them. If you call from them, it's, yeah, good to hear from you. We'll get that taken care of. And a lot of the times it's done inappropriately or inaccurately. And sometimes it's also done in a way that something the advisor doesn't. And that somewhat goes down to the relationship where we have clients that have arguably small accounts and are now just getting to the point of a relationship with them of, hey, I have all these other things going on. But an advisor's never going to know that if they're not trying to continue to foster a relationship on some of those smaller, objectively smaller accounts that are, as an advisor, less lucrative. But again, it's our approach to business versus somebody else's. Of we keep those accounts because they're our accounts. I feel we have some ownership and something we need to do for them. But it's also a case of you never know the client situation.
Well, I like to think about it, from the perspective is, you know, the type of firm we are. We're a large firm with a lot of advisors, and we're not in a situation where we're just one or two advisors and we're going to work for 20 years and retire and go away, right? So we only want clients that are in their 50, 60, 70 that have $1 million, $2 million because that's where all the profitability is, right? We're building something that we're trying to sustain for the long term, which means we need to have younger clients, we need to have middle-aged clients, we need to have older clients, right? Because over time, those younger clients are going to be our 60-year-olds with $1 million or $2 million. And the thing is that we're going to help them get there. And by starting with them at an early age where maybe they aren't a profit, maybe we lose money on them, that's okay. They're going to reward us with their loyalty down the road because we've done a great job to get them to the point where now they're a millionaire or whatnot. Yeah, we've earned it. So that's how I look at this. And I think as a firm, and I know this is across the board, I don't even have to ask this question of any other advisor, anybody on our team. We treat all our clients the same way. So we treat our $25,000 clients like they have, $5 million with us, because that's the respect that we want to give people.
No, and it is mutual. And I mean, that's something that also comes up to perhaps the less pleasant side is sometimes clients aren't a fit for us.
Yeah.
And going back to personalization, you might have somebody listening to this that, hey, my firm's doing XYZ or something just feels off here. Well, they may be making the decision you're not the right fit for them.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that you're necessarily a bad client, but they may be saying, hey, we're switching to only working with executives.
Yeah.
We're switching to only working with doctors.
And I'll tell you the fit thing too, and just tell me if you disagree. It's not about asset size or asset level.
No.
It's
The easy.
yeah, I think for me, and again, when I'm sitting down with a prospective client, and as you know this, I'm big on the planning process, right? And what I'm looking for is a client that wants to work with us, wants to be engaged with the planning, and takes our advice, because that's what's important, right? So they're constantly, and you're not going to take all of our advice. I mean, not everything that we say is going to.
And that's not to say that they implement.
No, but they're listening. We're having a reasonable conversations. They're open to ideas or new ideas. I think that's what we're looking for more than anything else. And it's not about, again, the asset side. It's about clients that are willing to work with us in a way that fits our model. I think you kind of alluded to that earlier as well.
Yeah, and again, I mean, that is personalization. It's not just the investment side; it's the relationship side. And I've said this, and this is a phrase that I probably overuse: is performance on your investments is important. There's no argument about that. But what is the way that advisors typically get hired and fired? It's the service. It's the service model. It's the personal touch. It's, are you getting the right amount of attention? And sometimes through an advising relationship, that changes.
Yeah.
In the early in the relationship, it may be, hey, I want to speak 4 or 5 times a year. And organically, it may be 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Now, that's not necessarily bad, because I think how we see that more times than not is early in the relationship, we're still forming the relationship, but we're also still forming the plan.
Yeah.
Particularly, say you're somebody who's very early into retirement, you don't really know what retirement looks like in the first 6 months, 6 years, I meant year or so, but even sometimes later into life, particularly if some change comes about. So the personalization there is the willingness to be flexible on the plan of, hey, I know we started that we were really concerned about income, and that's not the case anymore. So we have to have a willingness to say, you know what, at that point in time, this strategy made a lot of sense. Now it no longer does. And as a subset of personalization there, I think it's also the accountability and the transparency that goes along with saying this was our plan, but because it is actually personalized, we might have to say that we thought that was a good idea and we no longer do.
No plan. I tell every client this, right? When we actually in the planning process, none of this is set in stone, right? This is something we're going to review on an annual basis. There's going to be changes in your life. There's going to be changes in the external market conditions, and we're going to constantly adjust. So essentially, your financial plan is a living, breathing document. It's going to evolve and change based on on the changes in your life over time. So, and as your advisor, we're going to make adjustments and change the recommendations, and obviously change the way we work with you to fit that. And the other thing with our clients, we have clients that may come in, yeah, again, initially, like you stated, they want 4 meetings a year. Well, once they get to know us and, they spent more time working with us and we built that trust, right, which is earned over time, they may say, Joe, you know what, Josh, I'm good with a couple times a year and I'm good doing that over the phone or a Zoom. And we're going to adjust to that. And that's the personalization, right? So, but we're going to let the client dictate that as well. We're not going to, we're not going to say, hey, well, you had 4 meetings a year and we only want to give you 2 now because that's kind of, that's all you need. Well, we're going to let you make that decision.
Absolutely. And then we've seen the other way where it comes in, hey, we're feeling you out. We only want to have one meeting or two, but okay, so now something came up in life, or now I do want to do a plan because we are planning first.
Yes.
But I also would argue pretty much against anyone that we are very dynamic and up to date on the investment side and can go to toe with most people in that space anywhere. There are definitively things we don't do.
Yeah.
You know, if you have $2 billion, you're probably not a good fit for us. I'm going to call it what it is.
If you want to buy crypto, we're probably not the right place
Not
for
the
you,
right
right?
fit for you. And that's also, I mean, that's the transparency I was alluding to, which is more of a personal touch than just saying one size fits all. There are clients and circumstances that aren't a good fit for us.
But what you're not going to get here is a 80-20 equity bond asset allocation model, or a 70-30 or 6, whatever it is, right? That's what you're not going to get here. We're going to build out a custom plan or investment strategy. It's going to be all weather. It's going to have parts of it that'll perform in a flat market, protection in a down market, leverage on the upside in an up market, right? So it's going to be a true all-weather plan, which is not going to be cookie cutter. It's going to be, basically built around what your needs and goals and time frame are and your risk tolerance. But it won't be, and I will tell you for a fact, and Josh will definitely agree with this, cookie cutter.
Yeah. Well, and that alludes to, so personalization is a big word that comes out, but so is model and model portfolio.
Yeah.
And that can be viewed any number of ways
Yeah.
by any number of people. And having a model portfolio doesn't mean that it's not personalized, but it also definitively doesn't mean that it is.
Yeah.
It's how is that as a component piece of your actual plan? Because we have model portfolios, because if we believe XYZ is going to happen, that's what we build our portfolio about.
But it's only about 35 to 50% of your overall portfolio. Right? We're going to have other pieces in there that do other things, and again, that'll be customized to the client as well. The percentages and the weightings and those what I like to call satellites or sleeves.
Well, I think the nail on the head, the satellite components, and people talk about, four-legged stools, three-legged stools, whatever it happens to be. That's fine. It's a good comparison because it makes it easy to understand. But just sitting with an advisor and hearing, oh, we have a model. Well, the phrase is used a lot associated with any number of things, but it doesn't actually tell you anything. It's really the next question is, well, when you say a model, is it that the entirety of what my investment strategy is going to be as a model? Because I've sometimes, and this was more early in my career, there's the model, but then there's the model. Yep. So is the model a group of individual investments that are just a component piece of what I'm doing? Or are you saying that there's a model that covers everybody that I just, me make a toggle by, oh, it's going to be 10% less equity. Or it's going to be, it's a model, but when you peel the layers back, it's a 60-40. Ours is going to be a model per se at a global level, but it's going to be a model in respect that it makes up of these component pieces that are based around the personal situation you're in. Yep. But that's not like that for everyone.
No.
I mean, you have far more experience in the world of wires, models.
I've been doing this for 27 years. I spent a lot of time working with advisors in a previous life. And I'll tell you, more often than not, when an advisor says model, it's going to be, an equity bond model that's scaled up and down based on risk, whether it's 90-10, 80-20, 70-30, 60-40. But the equity portion is going to look exactly alike in everyone, and the bond portion is going to look exactly alike in every portfolio. And that's basically all you're going to get. I mean, that's kind of what I see more often than not. And I mean, tell me if you think differently. I don't think that is personalized.
No, it's a slider, it's a scale. And some of it is not necessarily the advisor's part, as we were talking about before this. So in my prior life as well, having experience at the wirehouses on both the product side and being an advisor there, at certain levels, unless you have X amount of assets or know the right people or your dad was an advisor, they're going to tell you what you can use. It's going to be that based upon your asset level up to XYZ, here's the report we put out quarterly, and here's the portfolios you can use. It's going to be touted as open architecture because internally it is, but they dictate what it is. And if you're walking out, with a slew of 4 mutual funds, well, I don't know if that's good or bad, but the mutual fund turned 100 years 100 years old this year. So if it hasn't changed, the investment world has changed a lot. That's probably, and I don't know this based on each individual situation, that's probably not personalized.
No.
That's probably what the advisor is allowed to use.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, a lot of advisors get, I think, stuck on how they've always done things, right? And rather than looking at, what are the new vehicles available to me? What's changed, in the world, right? The use of bonds, right? I mean, we've evaluated that extensively over the last 6 to 8 months within our own portfolios, how we use them, how they fit, and are there better vehicles out there? And we've made some adjustments based on that, right? But again, the world's evolved. When I started in the business, it was, everybody was buying, an A-share mutual fund for their clients, or a combination of two or three of them, right? And looking to get the break points and so forth. And then, you had institutional shares come out, which, basically was the precursor to models, right?
Yeah.
And but yep. But now there's so many other investment vehicles, and there was a time where I would have told a 25-year-old, hey, you know what, you're going to invest, a couple $100 a month. We'll just buy the S&P 500. Well, there may be better vehicles out there now than just buying the S&P 500, and that's the advantage of working with an advisor, I think, is they get to know you, they get to know what you're looking for, and then we can go out and look at the whole universe and determine what is the actual best solution for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. That's the difference.
Well, I think that's part of the, I guess you could say, interview process of an advisor. If you say, well, I'd like the S&P 500, that's just what I want. Myself as a client, I want some iteration of the S&P 500. And if the response is just buy a mutual fund or just buy an ETF, I hope that's because a bunch of other options were extinguished first. Because knowing, what little I know, I'll say, about the investment world, there are a lot of better options based upon your situation to go through first. And if it is a case of, and this is also the case of, like, this is your grandparents' advisor, this is your parents' advisor, and you're talking to them, and it's just, just go and buy SPY. Well, I wouldn't say that that's a strong recommendation. That's a bit of a throwaway, if nothing else. And the other subset of personalization is multi-generational. And if they're not trying to foster that relationship with you, one, it's somewhat distasteful just from the personal side.
Absolutely.
But also it makes me question a little bit of their business. Because if you're here for a long time, not just a good time, I would hope you're fostering the multi-generational side of the relationship as well. And for me, looking at, say, you're interviewing ourselves and another advisor, because that's what the internet says you should be doing, and I can't disagree with it. But if you're talking to two advisors and they're not concerned about that next step, even if that advisor's only 55 years old, they should be, or at least you should be concerned on their behalf if you're only 40.
Well, and we know this for a fact. Is it like 80% of the assets leave when they get transferred to the next generation? Great thing about working with us, and tell me if it's true, is that again, being a larger scale firm with so many advisors, we have advisors in their 70s, 60s, 50s, 30s. I think we're missing the 40s. Do we have a 40s?
I don't know. Well, we're on. Some of us are slowly getting there.
Yeah, somebody will get there at some point.
Yeah.
Even in their 20s. So, from that multi-generational standpoint too, is when clients come in and they bring their children. If the children want to work with their advisor, well, we've got another option for you, right? If you want to work with someone close to your generation, well, we have that here. So, I think that's the great thing about what we're building here. And again, we're building a long-term, firm. I mean, we're here. We're not here for 5 or 10 or 20 years. We're hopefully here for 75, 100, 150 years as a firm, and it's going to evolve and change over time. And we're going to have younger advisors and older advisors all through this process.
And you hit on, and there's constraints and restrictions around this as to what you can and can't say. But say you're the second or third generation, and you're starting to get involved in your parents' finances, grandparents' finances, or whatever. Maybe you have your own advisor, and we see this sometimes. But let's say we're in the situation where the first generation, second generation knows, I have enough assets for my lifetime. My long-term care is taken care of. I'm not going to need to tap into this. There's going to be an inheritance money left over for you. Well, the discussion we're then having with those two generations is, this being said, how do we start modifying your plan as Gen 1 to make this most efficient for Gen 2 or Gen 3? And if those discussions aren't happening with the first generation's current advisor, and you as Gen 2 or Gen 3 are going to be inheriting things, one, you may want to know, because it's possibly, and again, you'd have to have permission to do this, but you may want to know how that's going to affect your taxes.
Yep.
And if the advisor isn't including you in that or doing any level of next gen planning where, hey, the next gen planning is taking place for Gen 1, but with some small tweaks, it works for both Gen 1 and Gen 2, that is a disservice. And that should be something you.
Well, it may be that Gen 1 might be typically overly conservative. They have a non-retirement account that they plan on passing to Gen 2, right? They're not going to ever use the money. Well, we may, make the changes and make that account very aggressive because Gen 2 would be more aggressive, right? Knowing that it's going to pass on with a stepped up basis down the road.
And I mean, personalization is sometimes administrative of, and we talk about this and it seldom comes up. It's a quirky thing, but taking joint accounts and making them singularly owned, even between spouses. Of, hey, singularly owned, I get that step up in basis. The spouse had a step up in basis. They get that. Okay, it stays invested for a few more years, and then it's a TOD account, and it goes to the next generation. Or even they start gifting because maybe they say, you know what, myself as Generation 1 are okay eating some of these taxes to get it to Gen 2 or Gen 3. Now, if you never have that discussion with Gen 2 or Gen 3, well, maybe you don't realize that they're already paying 40+% in taxes, and it does or doesn't make sense.
And should I dare say that strategies like this is why you want to work with an advisor? Because this is something I think the average person, just out there doing it on their own is not going to think about.
Well, the armchair advice we get always is, well, put your kid, people say, oh, my friend told me to put my name on my parents' house. Oh, I want to make sure that my name is on the registration of this non-retirement account. I'm telling you, don't do any of that until you know the ramifications of it, because it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax liability. And and again, the same thing of couples. We have a case where bought Apple stock. It was in a joint account. Client brought it over. The health of the two is not even. One is slightly older and their health isn't very good. That's an individually owned account now, TOD to the spouse. We're going to get that step up in basis where previously it was going to be diluted. That's not a big, I'd say it's not as exciting on its face as doing some tax planning, Roth conversions, etc. But it's a somewhat simple administrative change that may or may not make sense depending on the situation. This one it did. That just with a little bit of paperwork is a big difference of step up in basis.
And I like to say this all the time is that no one's trying to do the wrong thing, right? And I think I said on the last podcast is that what most people are doing is they're doing all the right things in all the wrong places. And our job as your advisors to get you to do all the right things in all the right places and
At the right time.
at the right time, and create the most efficient plan available for you.
Yeah. And it's, again, talking personalization is a broad concept, and we could talk 14 hours about it, which I don't have in me. I leave the floor to you to do that.
I'm the older guy. I might need a nap soon.
That's fair. But it means a lot of things. It's from the smallest detail of administrative to how you like to discuss topics, whether maybe in your meeting personalization for you is I'd rather talk about my family. I don't really want to talk about them.
I mean, and there are clients to the point that they want, when they come into the meeting, they want everything uploaded electronically to, their file in our system where they can access. Some clients want the actual paper. Some clients just want us to put it on the TV for them or on the screen for them. And depending on the client, when we have those notes in our system, that's another level of personalization, right? So, I think to me, personalization ultimately is just meeting the client where they want to be.
Yeah. Do you feel good coming out of it? And feeling good doesn't mean that you got all good news either, because, and I'm a firm believer, and seeing in action, I believe you're the same. Our job is not to tell people what they want to hear.
What they need to hear.
And I think that's the ultimate form of gauging your relationship. And is it personal to you or not? Then sometimes it's going to be telling you, hey, what we're doing currently is going to be a problem. It's your money. You can ultimately decide to do what you want, but this may or may not work, or this is not the right way to do it, or this does need to get fixed. I'm always open to the input. Maybe the client knows something I don't, which is why you need to have the relationship to be able to be frank. But you want a personal touch. That personal touch is going to have to include telling you sometimes what you don't want to hear.
I tell everybody that in our initial meet and greet / interview meeting is that part of my job is to be brutally honest with you, if everything looks great and everything is, the trajectory is great, well, we're going to let you know that. But if things don't look good, I have to tell you that. If I don't, I'm not doing my job.
And I think even in the best relationships, and this is somewhat of a gauge of your relationship with your advisor or your client, there probably needs to have been at least one time where you said, "Hey, I don't think this is a good idea," or this part's not something I would do, etc. And if you've never had that, maybe you do just have a normal situation.
Yeah.
But odds are that something has been left out. If you
Well,
haven't at least one time had, "Hey, I'm a little bit concerned about this," or maybe we shouldn't do that.
Well, I mean, getting back to personalization, you probably haven't gotten to know the client well enough if you don't have a situation like that come up at some point, right?
Or you as the advisor are uncomfortable
Yeah.
giving somebody bad news or making a hard statement or asking the hard question. Not necessarily that they're a bad advisor, but they may be bad for you.
Yeah, I'm going to be really honest with you on that one. I think that if that's the case, then you're probably not in the right job.
That's fair. Then take it to the most to the truest form. And that's normally, I think, more an early advisor issue.
I think so. I think when you're younger, it's harder to do that. You want everything to be sunshines and roses. You want when clients to come in to be happy, so you can ask for referrals and get referrals and grow your business. But we know that's not how the real world works. There's going to be situations, and there's going to be times that you disagree with the advisor, with the client, which is okay. That's going to be natural, right? And I tell clients that all the time. I'm going to give you the best advice. If I disagree with you, I'm going to tell you. Ultimately, it's your decision to make, and if you decide to do something different, well, that's what we're going to do because it's your money. But I'm going to let you know how I feel. I'm going to give you the best advice that I can because that's what you pay us to do.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's very few cases, but I think there are some out there. And I think I've only ever encountered one where the client wants to go in such a different direction that we are no longer a good fit for you. And maybe it's an ethical thing. It depends. There are circumstances that comes up, and we've had a couple cases that work this way. I understand what you'd like to do, but I can't support it. In no circumstance do I believe that it makes sense for you empirically, objectively, whatever word you want to use. That being said, you want to do it, we won't hinder you, but we're not right for you.
And I mean, that's part of that honesty, right?
Yeah.
Is that there are going to be times where, again, it just doesn't work out, where we're not a fit, we're not comfortable, you know, executing on something they want to execute on, and that's okay.
No, yeah. Again, doesn't mean we just may not be a good fit. Sometimes that is the case, that it's not. And here I think it is true that maybe it's just the wrong firm. Maybe it's the wrong individual. Maybe you need to change individuals within that firm. Maybe it's a stylistic thing.
And that's why we do our meet and greets, right? Get to know the clients up front before they become a client, is to make sure it is a good fit. And it's not always going to be the case on the front end as well.
No, and I mean, what is our business? Our business is dealing with people's money. And in a lot of cases, people would rather tell you how their last checkup went or what their medical condition is before tell you their bank account balance. And you have to build the level of comfortability to be able to do that, or it's not personal.
Yeah, I always find that a little crazy, right? Because, someone comes to us for financial advice. They want, recommendations and input, but they're not willing to give us the information.
We just had this happen a couple weeks ago.
A proper recommendation, yeah.
Of, hey, I've been burned by advisors in the past, and that does happen. Not much like doctors, attorneys. I mean, anyone you see out on the street, not everyone's good at their job. That's just empirically and statistically true. But if you come and you want us to put something together, I'm not saying you have to trust us explicitly from the jump, but we at least have to have enough information to move forward.
We don't have the data. We can't create a plan.
It's still numbers. It needs to be personal, but at its core, the numbers dictate success and failure.
Exactly. And and the personalization is just taking the data and extrapolate it and creating a plan based on that individual, right?
Yeah.
So, no, I mean, I'd agree with all that. I think I'm running out of steam here. What about you?
No. I mean, it's, as mentioned, we could talk about it forever, but a lot of it is, as an individual, when you're first interviewing or looking at advisors or parents advisors, because again, sometimes it's good to work with the parents advisors, sometimes it isn't. Age is a big part of that. Just being frank, if you're 45 years old and the advisor group is 65, they're going to retire before you. Something's going to take place. If they're in their 60s and don't already have a transitionary plan with somebody else coming in, then that's, I'd say, objectively a problem. They're probably planning on exiting before you're at retirement. So again, if they're not including, as we are, we have people in 20s, 30s, maybe not 40s yet, but we're getting there, 50s, 60s, and I believe early 70s, to make that transition.
Yeah, and that's the goals. And then, the 20-year-olds are going to be the 30-year-olds, and 30s are the 40s, and we're going to continue to bring on young advisors and cultivate them and train them, and and allow them to flourish over time. And that's
Yeah.
what makes this thing work long term, right? And I think that's the beauty of working with a firm like ours, is that you can stay at the same place for your whole life, and your full life cycle, and there's going to be someone there to work with you, and there's going to be someone there to work with your children and your grandchildren.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's a hard pitch to make out today as a close, it's if you're interviewing firms or you have firms or someone in your family is working with a firm that isn't looking at it that way, we know what the outcome's going to be.
Yep.
It's going to be they're going to sell. It'll be some liquidity event. You're going to end up getting somebody new that you don't know, doesn't know your plan. And not just from an advisor standpoint, but from a business standpoint, that's not a good business.
And we've seen it happen. I mean, dozens of times.
I mean, that's
So it happens every day, actually.
that's how we often grow is
Yeah.
somebody didn't have a succession plan and we're able to offer it to them. Sometimes it's in what we would coin a reasonable timeline, and sometimes it isn't. Because again, if you have an older advisor, if I'm 70 some years old and my life is changing, I may say I need to be out of this in the next 6 months.
I mean, we've seen this too, where you might have an advisor that's 55 or 60, has a health scare or a health event, and
Yep.
next thing you know, they're retiring. Right?
Yeah, and we had that happen a few years ago. And I mean, that works both ways. If you're an advisor that doesn't have that, you should probably start considering it. And we have the means to help you do that in pretty creative ways, not just the way where Pete is going to come in and say, here's your number, take it or leave it, we'll see you later. You want to stick around, you want to transition a different way. That's an advantage we have that a lot of firms aren't interested in.
No, and we work in teams as well. So, for example, every one of our clients don't work with just me or don't work with just Josh. They have both of us. They're comfortable with both of us, right? We'll introduce a junior advisor at some point as well. So there's going to be multiple points of contact. Something happens to one of us, well, the other one's here, and you have that relationship, and you've got that transition.
Yep. Then we have a large enough footprint and our bench is deep enough that maybe it's transitioning somebody to a different location if that's what they want to do. As a business, that's an advantage that we try to offer to the people that we're working with is, hey, if you want to be able to be transported or transportability, there are other opportunities for you.
Yeah, we've got what, 9 offices across the Northeast, and that's ever expanding. So. And that's part of the personalization too. The reason we have 9 offices across the Northeast is that we want to go to where the clients are. And honestly, we've got clients that if you want us to meet you in your home, we're going to come to your home as well.
Even if that's flying too.
Yeah, I just flew out to Miami to meet a client.
Yep, and we have North Carolina coming up in a couple weeks for a leg of a trip with multiple people.
So if you're interested in working with us, and we're not local as far as office, that's not a problem. We will come to you.
Yeah. And if you're walking in and everybody looks like they're about the same age on either end or direction, you might want to ask some questions about that as far as the most direct advice I can give of both people looking for an advisor, have an advisor, heard of an advisor, whatever, it's trajectory.
Yep.
And is it just financial planning for you, or is it financial planning for you plus Gen 1, 2, 3, whatever it is? Is it legacy, or is it static? If it's just static and you say it's just me and I don't care what happens to my money, I want my last check to bounce, then maybe that doesn't matter as much to you. But that also doesn't mean that your viewpoint may not change or life may change around you and you do end up needing that.
I agree.
But outside of that, I think that's all I have for today.
That's all I got. So I guess this is the end of the J&J Show, episode 2. So with that, like, subscribe,
I don't know.
comment, subscribe, right? Is that what it is? You can cut all that out, Lucy.
Or you can leave it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you on episode 3.
Yeah. Like, comment, subscribe.